we continue to think about change and the organization. In this module, we're going to explore 3 models of the change process and emergent change. Any project or program methodology implicitly contains a change process. However, such methodologies need a complementary understanding of the change process involved. We have chosen to focus on 3 models that offer insights into these. Lewin's 3-stage model, Kotter's 8-step model, and Senge's systems thinking model. The first model we'll look at is from the mid-20th century. Social psychologist Kurt Lewin first described the process of individual change as unfreezing, when inertia is overcome and existing habits and mindsets are broken down. Change, a period of confusion as old ways are being challenged, yet the future way of being is not clear. Refreezing, when new mindsets and habits are formed and become established, and a degree of psychological comfort is restored. Does this remind you of any other models we have spoken about? Yes, it could well remind you of bridges, endings, neutral zone and new beginnings, with the change and the individual context. Lewin extended this deceptively simple model to describe groups in change. He recognized that the collective mindsets and practices of a group must be broken down before a change can occur, and that subsequently, effort is needed to consolidate the group's new mindset and practices. So, how do we put Lewin's 3 stages into practice? Describing the process of change for an individual, Shine compares 2 types of anxiety as motivators for behavior. These are learning anxiety and survival anxiety. You may be thinking, why are we talking about Shine as we are looking at Lewin's model? Please bear with me and it will become clear. Most people have, through their lives, developed a level of learning anxiety. They have struggled with the frustration of trying to work out a problem that seems intractable. They have experienced the feeling of incompetence whilst trying to learn or improve a new skill. Say a golf swing, or yet another new version of their computer's operating system. They have made mistakes and experienced the emotional penalty as they are criticized by others. All these create a learning anxiety that makes change inherently difficult. Of course, some people have high levels of such anxiety and some much lower levels, but the experience of learning anxiety is widely shared. As mentioned previously, change will require unlearning old ways and learning new ones, and the result of learning anxiety is to inhibit change to a greater or lesser degree. Lewin's concept of unfreezing as a part of the change process, Shine suggests that for organizations to change at an acceptable pace, they must learn to unfreeze by creating a competing and greater anxiety, survival anxiety. Lewin sees 3 activities in this unfreeze stage. 1. Clearly define the current situation. 2. Create a vision of the desired end state. 3. Identify the forces which will help drive and resist the change, increasing the driving forces identified and decreasing the resisting forces. The second stage of Lewin's model is change, and in this stage, Lewin suggests whilst taking people through a change, a plan is followed to implement the intended change or changes. Involve people and maintain the safe learning environment that Shine prescribes in the unfreeze stage. Allow experimentation over solutions to problems. Provide great role models that people in change can identify with. Shine also then built upon Lewin's unfreeze stage with a prescription for those seeking to create change, Lewin's change stage, in a group that involves 3 apparently conflicting activities, these being disconfirmation, creation of guilt or anxiety, and creation of psychological safety. Shine said to motivate people to make a desired change, it is necessary to create sufficient survival anxiety to destabilize the current situation and drive them forward. At the same time, it is necessary to support people in such a way that they feel safe enough to learn effectively, that their learning anxiety, which would hold them back, is kept as low as possible, and certainly lower than the survival anxiety. It is important, when driving change, to involve people, and you need a plan. Remember what Pink said about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. The third stage of Lewin's model is refreeze. And at this stage, Lewin believes new work practices become new habits. New ways of thinking become the conventional wisdom. Reward behaviors and results that are aligned with the change environment. A time for vigilance on the part of the change leaders, who must address any tendency for people to talk, think, or act in line with the old ways. It is worth noting, the third point about rewarding behaviors is a traditional view of motivation, and with the fourth point, it is key that if people are acting in the old way, this needs to be addressed, and the leaders should be setting the example. It all seems so straightforward. However, I am sure you are aware it is not always as easy to put into practice. The second model we look at is Kotter's 8-step model. Several prescriptions have been proposed for strategic, organization-level change, and Kotter's is one of the best known. His ideas, based on analysis of many change efforts over a 15-year period, were set out in a Harvard Business Review seminal article. The article identified 8 common errors that organizations make when trying to undertake major changes. This was followed by his book, Leading Change, in which he elaborated his 8-stage process. 1. Establishing a sense of urgency. 2. Creating the guiding coalition. 3. Developing a vision and a strategy. 4. Communicating the change vision. 5. Empowering employees for broad-based action. 6. Generating short-term wins. 7. Consolidating gains and producing more change. 8. Anchoring new approaches in the culture. Each stage was an antidote to one of the errors he identified. The whole process offers a roadmap for undertaking major organizational change, placing a strong focus on the role of effective leadership. It is required reading for those leading or supporting change programs, not least because many senior organization leaders will also have read it. The delightful fable Our Iceberg is Melting by Kotter and Rathgeber is also based on and teaches these 8 stages. There is an underlying assumption in Kotter's writing that, given the right process and the right leadership, change can be planned and managed. He acknowledges at a number of points the messiness of change and offers prescriptions for dealing with this. In his 7th and 8th stages, Kotter does engage with the complexity of organization systems and how one thing affects another. However, he appears to see organizations and change primarily through the machine, architecture, and political systems metaphors previously described, and does not engage strongly with the less deterministic metaphors. It is worth noting that you will not be expected to recall the precise sequence for exam purposes, although the differences between earlier and later stages may be examined. If you think about it, Step 1 relates to survival anxiety. Step 2 will be about the sponsor, manager. Step 3, Lewin also said vision and strategy for delivery. Step 4, it is all well and good having a vision, but we need to communicate it. Step 5, think about Pink, autonomy, mastery and purpose. Step 6, Bridges said celebrate making progress and success. Step 7, the change is on a roll. And Step 8, I always think about Peter Drucker, who said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So we need to make sure the change is embedded and is aligned to the desired culture and beliefs. There are many forms of organization, and some are more change-friendly than others. A tall, traditional family tree hierarchy is, as Kotter points out, optimized to deliver business as usual. However, it frequently makes any change more difficult. Managers at many levels all want to be involved and have their say. A change initiative can easily run out of energy before it gets final approval at the right level. By contrast, a part of the organization that is composed of largely autonomous, self-directed teams is likely to generate a great deal of change. In this case, the risk is not of smothering change, but of too many, possibly incompatible changes taking place around that part of the organization, a sort of anarchy that may not be in the best interests of the organization. The challenge is to keep an organization change-ready, whilst retaining the stability to do its business effectively. Kotter recognizes that an organization's traditional structure and processes are designed to achieve best results for its day-to-day work. They're not designed to deal with the constant stream of changes that large organizations need to deal with in increasing complexity. He proposes a second strategic operating system to work alongside the business-as-usual one. This second system is designed to be agile, making use of a network structure to monitor every aspect of the organization's internal and external world. It identifies, initiates, and implements changes, constantly reviewing and maintaining the organization's strategy and direction. This is not a freeze, unfreeze, refreeze concept, because there is no strategic steady state to refreeze. In this kind of organization, Kotter's guiding coalition is reconceived as the owners of this strategic operating system, identifying big opportunities for the organization. For each such opportunity, the strategic coalition creates a sense of urgency around it. They apply his other 7 steps, which are reconceived as accelerator processes, engaging volunteer change agents from around the organization to make the initiative happen. The guiding coalition becomes the strategic sun with multiple change initiatives, each with its own mini-guiding coalition as planets around it. The volunteers who run these initiatives bring them to their daily experience of the business-as-usual hierarchy. This minimizes the risk that the changes are disconnected from the organization's day-to-day work. This bold concept deliberately builds into the organization's structure a set of processes that can act as reinforcing loops for any change that may be needed. It shows one way in which the organization structure can be configured to create agility and change readiness. Of course, to implement such an approach will in itself entail a significant change process. The business-as-usual element is on the left-hand side of this illustration. The third model we'll look at is Senge's systematic model. Peter Senge became known for his work on the learning organization, particularly through his book, The Fifth Discipline. The fifth discipline, to which the book title refers, is systems thinking, which addresses some of the difficult-to-explain phenomena we see in organizations and in change processes. Senge writes about what he terms profound change in organizations. He uses biological and ecological metaphors to describe the processes that limit organizational growth and the implementation of proposed changes. Senge believes, to understand why sustaining significant change is so elusive, we need to think less like managers and more like biologists. All growth processes in nature arise out of the interplay between reinforcing growth processes and limiting processes. The seed contains the possibility for a tree, but it realizes that possibility through an emergent, reinforcing growth process. The seed sends out small feelers. These primitive roots draw in water and nutrients, leading to further expansion, more water, nutrients, and so on. The initial growth process is underway, but how far it progresses depends on a host of limits: water, nutrients of the soil, space for the roots to expand, warmth. Eventually, as the tree begins to extend beyond the surface, other limits will come into play: sunlight, space for the tree's branches to spread, insects that destroy the tree's leaves. When growth stops prematurely before the organism reaches its potential, it is because the growth has encountered constraints that could be avoided, that are not inevitable. Other members of the same species will grow more because they do not encounter the same constraints. Any particular limit mentioned above, not enough water, nutrients, or space for the root system, could potentially keep the seed from growing. Senge points out that the kind of systems thinking that explains why different tree seeds grow to different heights, shapes, and states of health, or not at all, can be applied to change. To understand how profound change can be nurtured and sustained, requires us to understand the many self-reinforcing growth processes that will support and enable change, and the limiting process that, if not addressed, will stunt or kill it. A self-reinforcing process is a positive feedback loop or virtuous cycle. A limiting process is a negative feedback or vicious cycle. We look at virtuous and vicious cycles in more clarity in the practitioner element in the context of sustaining change. Understanding the various reinforcing and balancing feedback loops that will affect a change process allows us to look for ways to strengthen the reinforcing processes and to mitigate those that would work against the process. Perhaps some of the constraints can be lifted too. For example, limited working hours. Time available is often a constraint in organizational change. Could be overcome with more people committed to the change program. This diagram is adapted from Senji's book, Dance of Change, and helps explain Senji's view on organic change. In his book, Senji says, "The curve in the diagram is not idiosyncratic to organizational change efforts. It traces the pattern followed by anything that grows in nature, even something that grows and dies prematurely. In fact, the S-shaped growth pattern occurs so frequently in biology that it has its own name, sigmoidal growth. All individual organisms, from humans to beetles, likewise grow according to the same pattern, accelerating, then gradually slowing until full adult size is reached. This pattern recurs again and again in nature. The biological world teaches that sustaining change requires understanding the reinforcing growth processes and what is needed to catalyze them, and addressing the limits that keep change from occurring. Effectively, what gets in the way? And the challenge of getting started at all, and then the challenge of sustaining things once they have begun. Senge and his co-authors describe with great clarity the challenges of initiating change, of sustaining the transformation, and of redesigning and rethinking the organization. 1. Initiating change. People feeling they do not have enough time. People finding insufficient coaching and support. People unable to see the relevance of the change. Problems with leaders not walking the talk. 2. Sustaining the transformation. Anxieties about job security, learning, trusting others in new situations, and loss of control. How to measure change, the tension between measurement as learning and as assessment. Using culture so that change in a pilot group is not seen as a cult activity. 3. Redesigning and thinking. Governance, for change program and organization, as control or as direction setting. Spreading new practices effectively. Giving meaning to strategy and vision. Throughout, they demonstrate some of the typical feedback loops that occur as these challenges are faced. They provide many practical examples from a range of organizations and offer suggestions as to how to nurture and grow change through to maturity. Kotter's approach to changing organizations is based on highly visible, large-scale transformative change, driven primarily by the senior leadership of the organization through the guiding coalition. By contrast, Senge suggests that profound change occurs when small-scale initiatives are skillfully nurtured by well-aligned leadership at all levels of the organization and then spread. His thinking is closest to the organism, culture, and flux and transformation metaphors discussed previously. The flux and transformation metaphor helps to explain how change can occur in very large and complex organizational systems where the nature and extent of the force involved are not easy to map. We do the best we can with systems thinking, notice the effects on the systems of any interventions we make, and adjust our behavior accordingly. Sometimes, the best we can do is to decide on the most important outcomes we wish to achieve and try to intervene in ways that direct the organization's energy accordingly. Both Kotter's and Senge's views contain significant truth, and different change situations and organizational cultures may call for emphasis on one or the other approach. We now move on to look at emergent change. The discussion of change in the previous section recognizes that not all change initiatives can be fully planned. Morgan's machine metaphor provides only one way to look at change. Bernard Burns, in writing a fascinating case study of organizational change, summarizes the literature about different approaches to organizational change by saying that the two dominant ones are the planned and emergent approaches. In this section, we will explore the roots of an emergent approach to change, summaries of the situations most likely to require such an approach, and some suggestions on how leadership can be effective in promoting emergent change. The roots of emergent change, chaos theory. Links are often made between emergent change in organizations and chaos theory. Chaos theory is a field of mathematics that studies where small differences in initial conditions yield widely diverging outcomes, rendering long-term prediction impossible in general. One of the pioneers of this field, Edward Lawrence, is quoted by Danforth in this highly enigmatic summary. Chaos, when the present determines the future, but the approximate present does not approximately determine the future. A simpler understanding comes from a famous example, summarized in the title of a talk given by Lawrence. Does the flap of a butterfly's wings in Brazil set off a tornado in Texas? The famous butterfly effect. This is not to suggest that any butterfly has the power to create a tornado. However, in principle, the flap of its wings, along with a huge number of other factors, may contribute to the initial conditions for such an event. In organizational life, it is clear that change depends on a variety of factors, initial conditions, some of which are difficult to identify. Individuals with no formal power may have substantial impact on the outcome of a change process. Even the mood of an influential individual on the day that a change is communicated could contribute to initial conditions, leading to success or failure. These factors are not strictly random, but are, for practical purposes, impossible to include in formal change plan. In this sense, it is wise to recognize that even a planned change has elements of unpredictability. Holland describes complex adaptive systems, CASs, as systems that have a large number of components, often called agents, that interact and adapt or learn. Some examples quoted by Holland are financial markets, the Internet, and the body's immune system. This model also offers a helpful way to look at organizations and change system. Holland's model, complex adaptive systems, offers a helpful way to look at organizations and change. Organizations consist of many agents. These are people and groups of people who work within the same definite, bounded organizational space and who are interdependent. Organizations are complex. They are structured around, perhaps even formed by, the many daily interactions between these people and groups. The interactions follow a set of formal rules and systems, together with a range of complex social and cultural conventions. Organizations adapt. The patterns of behavior driven by these rules and conventions tend to self-organize and mutate over time. Moreover, the patterns and rules and conventions themselves adapt and change in response to events which occur during the interactions. From the point of view of organization change, this suggests that organizations will naturally change and adapt over time. It also suggests that all people and groups, agents in the organization, will contribute to that change, intentionally or otherwise. New approaches emerge best when people are well trained, highly motivated, and have the freedom to try things out. Empowerment. The tendency to self-organization leads to change that bubbles up, often with similar elements emerging in pockets around the organization. Any action that helps to shape such contributions in ways that align them with change objectives will be beneficial. Detailed planning may not be possible, but by working through networks of influence and advocacy, emergent change can be encouraged and shaped. In summary, if a change is needed, an organization will adapt if the employees have the right skills and training. This will result in change emerging rather than by strategic planning. It also reminds me of Pink and his feelings on, if you get out of the way and let the people get on with it. The next example of emergent change is complex responsive processes. We have already suggested that the complexity of organizations stems in part from the network of interactions between people and groups. Stacey emphasizes this process in which one person does or says something, gesture, and the resonance this creates in another person generates a response. Many of these interactions are programmed by culture or habit, but no pattern is inevitable. Small differences in situation will create different gestures and different response. Stacey writes, "Making sense of organizational life requires attending to the ordinary, everyday communicative interacting between people at their own local level of interacting in the living present. This is because it is in this process that the future is being perpetually constructed as identity and difference." Across an organization, the interaction of these unpredictable gesture-response cycles will create small changes, like waves on a shoreline, or larger ones, like tides and storms. Stacey identifies 3 dynamics that affect these interactions and their outcomes: how people relate to each other, formal role relationships, and informal personal relationships; how aware people are of the impacts of their interactions, the degree to which they are conscious or unconscious of these impacts; how people define what is and is not acceptable in the public space of the organization, the things that are legitimate, socially accepted, or shadow, less socially acceptable, such as gossip. Each of these 3 dichotomies, formal, informal, conscious, unconscious, legitimate, shadow, continually exert its own pull on the direction of the organization's development, much as the moon's gravitational pull moves the oceans and creates tides. This means that change and development is seldom linear, because these 3 influences are sometimes aligned, creating large effects, and sometimes opposed, almost cancelling each other. In managing a change process, it is wise to be aware that every conversation, every interaction has the potential to shift the course of that change. It also means that it is unwise to overreact to the ebb and flow of particular events, but to keep clear about the overall direction of travel. It is necessary to be prepared to rebalance communications and to engage continually with networks of influence across the organization to ensure that change continues to move in a desired direction. We now think about change situations that require an emergent approach. An organization change can usually be identified with one of 2 main archetypes, which, as Burns points out, are described, in different ways and using different words, by Cantor, Stein and Jick, and by Beer and Noria. Swift and sudden. A short period of turbulent, typically imposed change, designed to deliver quick results, often driven by threats to the organization's continued success or survival. Developmental and deliberate. An extended period of patient work to build the organization's culture and capability. A change that can readily be seen within Gareth Morgan's machine metaphor, such as the implementation of an IT system update, can generally be implemented with a swift and sudden manner. Changes such as these may contain much detailed complexity, but are not ambiguous or uncertain. They respond well to a planned change approach. Any change that is necessary for the organization's survival is also likely to be swift and sudden, and will similarly be managed as a planned change. On the other hand, it is the nature of culture and capability to build over time, through a developmental and deliberate approach. Although the desired direction may be clear, the precise route is likely to be less so. Deviations and explorations are a common feature of culture change journeys. In such circumstances, a more emergent change process should be expected. The Change Management Institute puts it like this: where the core of the change is to systems, structures, processes, and practices, then planning and scheduling is possible. However, where that core change is in the discretionary decisions people make about their patterns of values and behaviors, no dates can be fixed in advance. People will engage with new patterns of behavior individually and in their own time. These 2 types of change are not mutually exclusive. Elements of both approaches may be seen in any particular phase of change occurring over time. The developmental and deliberate may prepare the way for the swift and sudden, or may be used to align culture and capability with a swift and sudden change already made. Before we move on, can you think of an example of a swift and sudden change? Next, we think about defining and moving towards a future state. The complexity described earlier in this section does not mean that change managers and organization leaders are powerless. It is possible to describe and define the direction of change that is required and to identify indicators which will show that progress is being made. This can be achieved through a 4-step process. 1. Start by deciding on the big picture change which would bring great rewards to the organization. That is the to-be state. 2. Look around the organization as it is now and list all the current consequences of that change not yet being a reality. That is the as-is state. 3. As an exercise in creative imagination, step into the future organization after the desired change has occurred, perhaps in 3 or 6 months, perhaps more, and list all the outcomes. 4. Identify the differences between the lists, both in objective, numerical measures, and in the more subjective, informal, behavioral indicators, where precise measurements are difficult or impossible. This process, especially if conducted with a group in a facilitated workshop, can yield powerful results. It clarifies and makes real the future state in terms that can be described effectively to others. It also identifies those leading measures, indicators, and markers that will enable all involved to track progress towards the desired state. We now need to think about leadership in emergent change. Leaders cannot succeed in promoting deep, emergent change and transformation simply by more planning. However, leaders can be intentional about their own words, challenging existing paradigms and supporting new ones. They can be sure that their own actions model consistently the new expected behaviors. Some key guidelines for providing effective leadership in emergent change situations include: accept the limits of what is possible to direct and control. Changes in values and behavior are seldom linear or fully predictable. Notice where the energy of the systems and people is currently focused and the outcomes of this. Talk widely throughout the leadership community about any different outcomes that are desired. Think in systems terms about the reinforcing and balancing systems you can identify. As far as possible, get the leadership community speaking with one voice about the desired outcomes. Make changes that you, as a leadership community, consider likely to shift the current equilibrium, enhancing some positive feedback loops and mitigating some negative ones. Maintain a high profile for the desired outcomes. Keep discussing them in the organization at every opportunity. Observe the effects of the interventions you have made, especially the direction in which the system is moving relative to your desired outcomes. Keep repeating the last 3 preceding actions, holding firmly to the non-negotiable outcomes, but negotiating other issues as necessary. Celebrate and mark milestones on the journey. Remain open to new information that may lead to redefinition of the desired direction. In summary, emergent change is best seen as a journey, taken in company with others in the organization. A direction is set, and the company of people agree to travel together. The varied observations, skills, and experience of all the fellow travelers may be essential to support the company on its journey and to identify and deal with hazards and threats that appear along the way. The journey may have an intended, even agreed destination, but the route must be adapted to suit the company of travelers. Even the destination may need to be reviewed in the light of new information gathered along the way. Safe arrival is a signal for celebrations and planning the next adventure. Now you've completed the lessons within this module, you should take the opportunity to reflect back against the module objectives. Consider whether these objectives have been met and whether you need to review any of the lessons. When you are comfortable with having completed the module learning objectives, look over the support materials and then progress to the next module.